we have a confession to make.
Sometimes in life, mainly in podcasting, but also in life, we ask questions we already know the answer to.
But today, our guest gave us answer that surprised us.
With titles like Purpose Catalyst, Moderator, Chairman, we really didn't expect Mara to tell us about the power of telling stories. And in fact, now that we think about it, telling stories has become a bit of a common thread across all our guests. I mean, we've only had 5, but across all of them.
And now Mara introduced a new concept. So it's not just about telling story to really supporter behind your cause, but it is also as a way to create a social glue between people working together in a collaboration setting. So for example, if people have different agenda and they come to the table from different sector, telling story can be the social glue that hold everybody together and help people to relate to each other. Welcome to The Human Factor, the show where we explore social change through the eyes of social entrepreneurs and nonprofit advocates. My name is Melanie Roussin, her name is Erin McKay, and we are your hosts.
Today, we talk to Mara Bun, a power woman in Australia, previously the CEO of Green Cross Australia, an innovative environmental organisation. Mara is now a company director, moderator and advisor to companies, governments and research agencies. Today, we talk to her about the power of telling stories and the value of collaboration in creating social change.
Let's start the show.
As the previous CEO of Green Cross Australia, you really are still a leader in the environmental community. What was your first experience, or tell us about what led you to realise that the environment needed to be protected?
I have such a strong connection to the natural world back from really very early childhood days. I was born in São Paulo, in a big city in Brazil, but often went weekends to our little beach house on the coast of São Paulo, a place called São Sebastião, very beautiful, full of islands. And, as little kids, we spent a lot of time hiking in the hinterland. And we had a little pedalinho, a little paddle boat where my mom and dad and the kids would get on the back and we'd just go out to these amazing islands. And also my aunt had a farm in the interior of São Paulo, which is a beautiful area for rafting and hiking and camping. So then when we moved to California, it was amazing. This is the early 70s, and we discovered the national parks in America, and it was just insane. It was like, oh my God, you can just get in a station wagon and drive to these heavenly places and then just camp there. So every single holiday, my father did graduate work at Stanford. So for years we lived at Stanford campus, and every holiday we were at Yellowstone or Yosemite or Joshua Tree or, Death Valley. And I just grew up really understanding how much nature blesses us, on so many different fronts. And then I studied, environmental studies, as just kind of a side feature, undergrad, and, stayed connected. And then over the years had a chance to work with different environment groups and also to work with CSIRO, where they had some wonderful environmental research programs. And all of that has just created a very, very deep sense of purpose. I feel so strongly with the impacts of climate change already upon us. The human condition now relies on sustaining nature. I mean, that's not clearly understood. Unless we have thriving ecosystems, we don't get to thrive as a species, and that is the ultimate existential irony of this Anthropocene era that we find ourselves in. It's not just that we have this massive impact on nature, it's that we rely on nature for our own sustenance. So, on all those different levels, it's just been a very important part of my life.
It's amazing how our life experiences drive us towards social change in so many respects. And I mean, I myself transitioned from a corporate life to, I suppose, a more non-for-profit life. And I know you've made a similar transition as well, Mara, going from, more in the finance sector, and now more involved in the social enterprise type models. What I wonder is, what is the one thing that you've carried over from your corporate life into the non-for-profit sector or social enterprise sector?
Well, it's a question that I think, we should all ask ourselves all the time, because I think it's one of these little secrets. not only have I gone from the corporate sector to nonprofits, but I've gone back into corporates as well. So I spent, 10 years working for organizations like the Wilderness Society and Greenpeace and Choice, and then went back to Macquarie Bank and the Allen Consulting Group. And, I have found that it's incredibly rich to move between these different areas, but to have some sense of a higher purpose that keeps you motivated. And, some roles are a little bit more mundane than others, but they enable you to touch, these other things that matter. The other thing for me is technology has been a very powerful theme in my life. I was raised on science fiction. My father was raised on science fiction. I always had this strong sense of, the mystery of innovation and technology and science. And because in those early formative years when we moved from Brazil, we were in the heart of Silicon Valley, and then I had a chance to go back there and do technology finance. And now that I see, Web 2.0, the era of social media, enabled this peer-to-peer economy to kind of come out of the ground. And now this unleashing of an even different sense of, platforms for social enterprise, the sharing economy taking on this much more commercial lens. And then on top of that, the unbelievable exponential speed of just scientific discovery, that sits all around us. I just feel that, that's part of my purpose as well, to kind of stay connected to that and find ways to channel that dynamic environment towards, very good social and environmental outcomes. So staying connected at that level of purpose, I think, is everything, no matter what you do.
Absolutely. And so one thing that struck me is the power of collaboration that it's played in your career. Lots of the things in your work has been about bringing different organisations and different people together to create social change. What's been one of the most challenging collaborations for you?
Well, they are all so challenging. I've been in Queensland now for, 12, 13 years. And, I love Queensland. It reminds me so much of, what Texas would be like if it were Australia. And Texas is a very interesting place, okay? Because as well as being this quite carnivorous, oil-loving, very big truck-loving place, it is the home of Austin, which is an incredible community with the most eclectic music, learning, food scene, on the planet. It is the home of some of the largest wind farms funded by a guy called T. Boone Pickens, who used to be a raider of oil and gas companies, right? And it is the home of some of the more exciting space travel private ventures. People like Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, actually has, a private space exploration company coming out of the ground in Texas. Queensland's a bit like that. And I find, it has these really contrasting values, this beautiful natural ecosystem, this incredible reef. And in Southeast Queensland, we have the hinterland and everything else. And it's a very challenging place to find consensus around things like climate change, because the politics can be very fragmented and polarized. I've been working with a number of really wonderful people for, good on 10 years now, trying to get a climate adaptation strategy as well as, a climate mitigation strategy that understands it's about jobs and, multiple benefits and, can rise above politics. Because we need to, enable our cities to adapt to hotter, more frequent severe storms, etc. And we need to change our energy mix in a state where, the potential for new coal is very big. So sadly, I think I've tried so hard. But magically, I have not managed to get all sides of politics to collaborate and all businesses to jump in the tent and, But we came very close. We had a wonderful workshop just 6 months ago in Brisbane. The previous Newman government had a lovely guy called Andrew Powell as the environment minister, and he trusted Green Cross to support the stakeholder environment around the climate adaptation strategy. And the new environment minister, Stephen Miles, is, equally wonderful and has also enabled us to, do that. And it was incredible. We brought a room together with 150 people. You could not have a more diverse and engaged group. We would have had, 7 or 8 state government departments, 10 local councils, 30 businesses, the banks, the insurers, the developers, retailers, the emergency response fraternity, a myriad of community groups, the Green Building Council, many universities, CSRO, on it goes. And it was beautiful because we looked at this model called collective impact. Collective impact is a social change model that Stanford Business School has been examining now in the social, I think it's called the Stanford Social Change Review. It's, a bit like the Harvard Business Review. And this model basically shows how if you work in this collaboration model and leverage investments, policy settings, activities towards common goals, magic happens. And we broke into 5 different working groups, each with like 30 or 40 people just passionately looking at how we can work together. And I'm talking about organizations like Stockland and SEQ catchments and, water utilities and banks and insurers and local community groups and everyone with a thirst for how they could collaborate. And it's just very sad because I'm not quite sure where that's all going to end up because a bunch of us have been trying to get this strategy up for 10 years now. So the closer you get, in some ways, the harder it is. And I think partly it's because our politics are just so failed. This adversarial change every couple of years, it just isn't suitable for long-term change.
Mm-hmm. I mean, definitely one of the challenges that I know I face in my career is to try to convince people of that marriage between, the economic, social, and environmental impact, I suppose, and to try to get people at the table that may have different agenda to actually focus on commonalities as opposed to differences. Could you suggest in terms of ensuring that people can build that common agenda? It's quite a challenge, isn't it?
I just came back from a wonderful little 4-day personal retreat with a really close old friend. We hadn't seen each other for a number of years enough, and we thought, hey, let's just have a break. And we went to this beautiful resort up in Byron, and she's amazing. This is a woman, her name is Liz Broderick, and she's been our sex discrimination commissioner for many years. She now has a consulting business around, gender diversity policy. She's the New South Wales Australian of the Year. She's incredible. And we were reflecting on just how much she was able to achieve by telling stories. Now, she is such a beautiful and capable woman that her stories are told, to like the entire General Assembly of the United Nations.
Just a small group.
And it's just a small group. But not just that. Like Liz is the kind of woman who has empowered prostitutes, women in Indigenous communities that are dealing with fetal alcohol syndrome across 4 generations. Women who are empowering themselves under the most exceptional circumstances around domestic violence, finding hope and courage in really, really dire circumstances. And it's through stories. And I just find that's all I do these days is tell stories.
I love that. As a fundraiser, I love hearing that the power of stories is the way to go. And I think that's so powerful in social change is those stories of why something needs to change and these are the people behind it because we are all people. And so that's something that we can relate to. One thing I was sort of wondering, I've been lucky enough to travel to Kiribati and actually seen the rising sea levels that are literally on a day-to-day basis impacting the people of Kiribati. But for the most part, when I come back to Australia, people look at me and go, what is a Kiribati? And I have to say, well, it's this little tiny atoll and da-da-da-da-da. So what I'm wondering for you, having worked in the climate change sector for such a long time, how do we get people to change their behaviours or attitudes when it's not necessarily something that they can see? Most people haven't been to Kiribati.
Back to the stories. It's the individual thing, disassociated from lobbying or money raising or whatever, just profoundly understanding the world through a story, Let me tell you one. I recently came back from Copenhagen. The Danish government has a wonderful green growth forum, and I was lucky enough to be the MC there, and I met just these wonderful people. And one of them, she does some work for the Clinton Foundation and many others, and she's been volunteering for years around, women of the Pacific and the climate, refugee issue and so forth. And it's so, if people's shackles go up because they think, oh my God, it's another communist plot. No, these people, they don't want to come to Australia to get welfare benefits. Like they would rather, migrate up in their own land And if they can't get up on their own island, a nearby one where they can cultivate similar traditions. So this woman's been doing, since the Copenhagen talks, 2009, she's been doing a tour around the world with 4 or 5 groups of women that are impacted by climate change from indigenous communities. And around 2 years ago, they realized, tired of talking about it, because while they're talking, salt water is intruding on veggie gardens, the tides are coming in higher and higher. And so the movement already is beginning. And there's this amazing woman called Judy, who's from the Carteret Islands. And she's been part of this group of women that have been telling the story of climate impacts around the world. But 2 years ago, she started developing a migration model. And she negotiated with the Catholic Church donation of a parcel of land on the mainland of PNG that's a little bit elevated and had a cocoa plantation that was kind of, no longer commercial. And she has gradually been raising the funds to move her village of 1,700 people over. She has built the first tranche. 200 people now live there. She's fundraising for 400 grand to do the next tranche of housing. And this woman, who just volunteers from New York to make this happen, is looking for wealthy women in Australia that want to go meet Judy and want to understand what $400,000 can do for an entire community sustenance. Now, this is not just a model that has public sector, private sector investment. It has a powerful entrepreneurial sustainability thing because they are developing an export model out of it. These people are going to move and they're going to find a commercial basis to raise the next generation of kids.
That sounds like a logistical nightmare.
Well, I tell you what, for people whose home is no longer viable, it's a logistical opportunity, right? And the fact that these models are coming out of the ground led by people from their own communities, to me, is like the story that now has to be told. And not in a political do-goody way, in a kind of like, hey, why not, you guys do crowdfunding for fun bee projects, why not do crowdfunding to help figure out how our region gets through the next 100 years without barbed wire? That's what it's about.
Because there's a bit of controversy in relation to climate change, and there are people sitting on both sides of the fence. Do you feel that the stories is also a way to deal with controversy or naysayers, for example?
Yeah, I think it is. The other thing that I often do, some of my best friends don't believe climate change is human-induced. I mean, that is a fact. And I think every single person who is passionately concerned with great conviction about climate change will have within their family, their close friend networks, their neighborhood groups, people that just don't buy the story. So what I often do when I speak, just in around or facilitate a conversation, I start by saying, for 4 years, CSIRO has been researching attitudes about climate change in Australia. And that number has gradually shifted, but, very marginally. Nearly half of all Australians do not believe that climate change is human-induced. And if you are one of the, it's something like 10% don't know of the 90% that have a view. Something like, of that group, maybe 55% believes it's human-induced and 45% to some degree either isn't quite convinced or is totally not convinced or, like that. So it's a significant part of the Australian population. In the US it is as well. That's one of the reasons why our politics is so polarized. It's become a political issue. So what I do is I just open by saying, I'm not here to judge you. I welcome a conversation regardless of what you think about whether climate change is human-induced. There's multiple benefits, If you think the climate is changing, but you think it's got nothing to do with burning coal, well, let's talk about how we deal with that change. If you think coal is the very best thing, but you've begun to notice that renewables are getting cheaper and they have less pollution and they may be a little bit more modern, let's talk about the values outside of climate change. There's plenty of common ground. And I think the less we judge each other and just realize, hey, people are entitled to see the world as they see it. Now let's move on, the better.
I love it. It's so simple.
Well, it's just acknowledging the reality. It is the reality. It's very, very hard for passionate advocates sometimes to kind of let go of the righteousness, and instead go to the what happens next question.
And so it seems a bit funny to ask this question when we're 3 women who work in sort of not-for-profit social change sector. But the fact remains that there aren't a lot of women in the high-profile positions within the social enterprise and not-for-profit industry. And so as a woman in a position of power who is creating social change, we were just wondering what message you'd like to leave for all of our listeners at home today. It could be anything you like.
Well, look, I mean, firstly, although it feels like there's a gender lens in the community sector, and I'm sure if someone did the numbers, you'd find there was pay inequity, especially around the social services side of things. Actually, the not-for-profit sector has a huge women's leadership talent pool already there, whether it's CEO level, senior executive level, board level. And to me, it's really, really inspiring to see the gender lens. You know, I think of people like Molly Harris-Olsen, who runs Fair Trade Australia, was the chair of the global Fair Trade Network. Oh my God, George Clooney sits on that board, right?
How do I get on this board?
And Molly's in Melbourne and has been here for decades doing amazing things. I think of people like Blair Palese, the CEO of 350.org, who created that organization from nothing to where it has shifted the divestment movement. You know, I think of the two young women that started the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, and one now is the CEO of, the Climate Commission. The other is running Earth Hour and, supporting all kinds of social enterprises. I mean, there's huge. Set that aside. I was just piqued the way you set up the last question. I guess the message I would leave is, there's a huge, huge challenge and opportunity ahead. We're going to, somehow bring another 2 to 3 billion people on the planet, no matter how much we protest about whether we like that or not. That's where the demography appears to be heading. And how we do that is very likely to involve large cities. And those cities will only be livable if we turn our minds to bringing nature back into them, to creating supply chains that, are light on greenhouse and really understand the power of distributed local resources. And we live in an era where anything is possible. A group of us got together in the Northern Rivers region and crowdfunded $4 million to start Australia's first community-owned renewable energy retail company. That was unheard of 5 years ago. 20 years ago, you wouldn't even imagine it. The future is different to the past. And, we just need to find courage and nimbleness and dare I say it, because I think I sense what our Prime Minister is on about when he talks about agility. So agility is actually a software term. In the past, you used to have these very large, bulky software development programs that cascaded stage by stage like a waterfall and kind of landed on the ground with this full functionality. And suddenly, 10 years ago, people realized, oh my God, the world was changing so quickly. That took too long and it just never worked. It was way too rigid. So agility is a form of software development where you do short releases, you trial as you go, you de-risk by cutting things that don't work, finding the things that do work, getting tons of feedback along the way, and continuing to innovate as your toolkit builds, because we live in this exponential change environment. We need to be very agile about a new model for social change that isn't about judgment. It's not about name pointing. It's about just finding the most collaborative, imaginative models for multiple wins and, multiple partnerships. And I'm totally confident that we can get there.
Thanks, Mara. That sounds like a beautiful message to leave our listener with today. And what I was going to ask you, Mara, is obviously, you're a moderator and you're a speaker. And so, if people want to connect with you and your work or just want to find you, where can they find you?
Look, I'm a big LinkedIn person, so just jump onto LinkedIn. And I do apologize in advance because I just can't do a whole bunch of stuff for free. It's really funny. People kind of think, oh, come talk to us. We want to do this. We want to do that. And it's like, well, you know what? Sadly, I still have a mortgage. But the wonderful thing is, sharing ideas is such a great thing. So let's absolutely connect on LinkedIn and kind of see what's possible in this new collaborative world.
Love it. Thank you so much for your time today, Mara.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure. Good luck. It's a great, great initiative.
So, Erin, what did you take away from our interview with Mara today?
Well, maybe it's just because it was the last thing that she actually sort of spoke about in the interview, but the notion of being agile. And as soon as she said it, I just got this like image in my head of a giant cruise ship like coming into port. This is going to show how little I know about boats, but like this cruise ship coming into port and, you know, something coming over the radio and saying you need to turn a little to the left, and like the massive effort that it would take for a cruise ship, because it's so big and it's got so many people on board, it would take for it to turn left. Whereas like old mate in a kayak in the same river, he's like, may only have one person and his kayak might be a bit rubbish and maybe even have a hole in it. But for him to turn left is super easy. Like, damn, he can turn left really quickly.
Exactly. And I think, you know, this is the challenge when you're working in a large charity versus a small charity. The problem, though, is although small charities can be more agile, sometimes they might not have the resources to be able to pull off a change very quickly. So, you know, there are benefits of being a large and a small organization, I suppose. But the need to be agile is a team that come across in different interviews, in different forms.
And I think actually what stuck with me that Mara spoke about so much, and I guess that comes back to her, you know, diverse background in collaboration, is that perhaps when smaller charities or small and large charities band together, they can actually become more agile together because they have more resources when they're pulled together. But that's obviously easier said than done.
It's easier said than done. But I think, you know, even again, coming back to the power of story in terms of trying to create that commonality.
Yeah.
Because the reality is people do come up often with their own agenda. And I think, you know, they can be quite protective of their turf. So, you know, to try to have stories that help people to relate to one another, I think is very important. And I think even to try to build that as an organization, to try to build that in your culture as well. So sometimes, you know, there's a saying that says, that's the way we do things around here. You know, trying to really look at building the capacity for agility within the organization itself.
And I think that's also like building in to the organization, like permission for you to change course and to say, okay, well, like this was really good, we thought, but there's X, Y, and Z reasons, which may be within our control or they could be out of our control, that mean that we have to actually change course and we have to admit our mistakes. So like having that cultural shift within your organization, regardless of whether you're big or small, to actually admit that you've made a mistake.
Definitely. And we talk about that in our first interview with Emile when we started the podcast. We talk about the importance of building a culture that allows for mistake. And this is how great things happen, is when you do allow some room for learning.
Yeah.
Because we cannot have all the answer. But also what I enjoy out of the talk today was there's a saying that when she said future is different than the past.
And when you actually look at it, I've got it written down in front of me. And when I look at it, I'm like, duh.
But it is really true. And I think even, you know, if you're talking to, you know, recruiting agent or, you know, there's that saying that says that past performance is an indicator for future performance. Yes and no. Because, you know, sometimes you do see potential. So when you do see potential with someone that may not tick every box on your checklist when you interview them, but they might actually be able to bring about change in your organization and bring a fresh perspective. So I think this culture of change and adaptability is also at the very beginning when you actually hire staff.
Yeah, you just got real deep there.
I know I did. So that was a great chat with Mara today.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please head to iTunes and rate us. Or you can head over to our Facebook page, The Human Factor, and hit like to join the conversation. Tell us what you thought. And if you have any thoughts or insights to add to anything Mara said today, leave us a comment.
Or you can tweet us at _Human Factor or visit the website at humanfactor.com.au and leave us a voicemail or a message. This show is just one part of a community that wants to affect and grow social change. If you have a topic or a person you'd like us to have on the show, please let us know. And if you'd like me to coach you or your team on how to build your tribe, please email me at melanie@humanfactor.com.au.
Thanks so much for listening. You're all awesome. We'll see you next time. Would you call yourself a change maker? We'd like to hazard a guess that if you've taken the time to find, download, and listen to this podcast, even if you don't call yourself one, you are. When we started up the Human Factor podcast, we had a vision of creating a community of people who are passionate about social change, and that's still our vision. So today, we're asking for your help to join us as a change maker to help us to continue to explore social change. As you all know, we launched the Human Factor podcast in November 2016 after almost a year of the idea floating around in our head. And in that year, we've basically been doing absolutely everything but launching a podcast. We've been interviewing guests, writing web copy, posting on social media, and just actually learning how to record our voices. Look, let's just say we've come a really long way since Mel told me about the idea. I mean, Mel even knows how to turn a microphone on now. We took this little idea that we had and we put it out there into the world, and we're so excited to see the episodes live and actually being downloaded. We've proven to ourselves more than anything that we could actually do it. But now that we've proven that we can actually do it, we need to keep on doing it. Neither of us are professional podcasters, and up until now, Mel's been paying the audio hosting fees and the editing fees herself. That's not exactly a sustainable model. So now we're asking for your help by making a monthly contribution to our Patreon page. If you've never heard of Patreon, Patreon is a platform where you can support all kinds of people all over the world who are creating, stuff. It could be art, a zine, or in our case, a podcast. You sign up online to make a small, and I'm talking as little as $3 here, monthly contribution that helps us cover the costs of creating the content that you consume for free. But becoming a Patreon supporter isn't just about money. As I said, it's all about creating a community of passionate change makers. Patreon is a big part of that because once you become a supporter, you're not just helping us create meaningful content, you'll be able to access the Patreon feed and join us as we really deep dive into issues that surround the social change sector. We think we all have the power to make a little change in our world, even if it's just with the change in the bottom of our bags. We hope you'll join us in sharing our vision of building a global tribe of change makers. So if you're able to give up one coffee a month to support us, head over to patreon.com/thehumanfactor for more info to sign up. That's www.patreon.com/thehumanfactor. And don't forget, you're all awesome.